how the hell are we going to spend billions on defense while avoiding boondoggles? Maybe we can't. The end of an era on television and what that means for us in a bigger cultural sense, and more problems at the CBC. This is the Line Podcast. This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning, like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common-sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. It's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca. You know what everybody needs in the summer, Jen?
A really long, extensive podcast talking in depth about Canadian defense and procurement policy.
See, that's good because you completely read the joke coming. And so I don't... Correct. That was the joke.
We're giving you that in the middle of summer.
So
we're doing that to you. Right now. It's coming at you.
No, it's not really about defense procurement. It's more, right. It's something, well, no, I'll rephrase that.
Read me the news. Assume I know nothing about defense.
It assume is 100.
Let's assume that I'm the woman in this conversation.
It is 100.
I know nothing about war.
Well, in that case, I defer to you. Sorry, I'm very well trained. Immediately executed an evasive maneuver. Here, let me hold the door for you and listen to you tell me about your day.
We're gonna get in trouble. We're gonna get in trouble right off the bat. Okay, it's gonna be one of those podcasts. I got it.
Luckily, more you. Cool. So no, this is going to be about defense procurement, but it's. I'm going to talk about defense procurement more as a lead into this other bigger issue that I'm having here, and I admit I've actually been struggling about this one for about 5 years. We can tie this one all the way back to the pandemic. Defense procurement is something I've been talking a lot this week. It was one of my segments on the Line on Tuesday. Glenn Cowan was here from 19 Investments. Glenn is a Canadian veteran. He's a 20-year officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. Most of that time he was in a special forces unit. And now he's doing venture capital for Canadian defense startups. And if you listen to the episode, I think Glenn makes a really good case for national security startups, defense startups, why Canada needs to actually take this industry seriously. You and I have spoken about this before because one of the things that drove me nuts about late stage Trudeau, you remember this, like the federal government agreed that we urgently needed to increase domestic ammunition production and then sat on the cabinet order authorizing that for year and a half for no particular reason, except I guess they never quite got around to it. So there's a lot of things here that make me think we really, really, really need to do a better job of making sure Canada, in partnership with our allies, can build the things we need to defend ourselves. But what I keep running into it, and just for the visual image here, just, you know how pranks, people will put clear tape across a door frame and then someone will walk into it and hit it with their face? That's what I'm running into here. The tape across the doorway that I'm hitting with my face is that I understand the theoretical need for Canada to have a vibrant, successful, and supported defense sector. And I have absolutely zero faith in the ability of any Canadian government to not turn that thing into a goddamn boondoggle. And Melanie Joly just a couple of days ago in a tweet, because what the hell is she now? She's the industry minister or something. I think we've tried to put her in some place she'll do limited damage. She was tweeting about how Canadian national security starts with domestic ship manufacturing capabilities. And it's just oh no, it doesn't. we might need that eventually. An interesting factoid, if people who spend less time thinking about defense procurement than I do, which I assume is 99.9% of the human population, North America and the Western Alliance in particular desperately needs more shipbuilding capacity. As an industry, it is something that has really languished in recent generations. And a lot of the global shipbuilding capacity that exists is in countries we don't necessarily want to count on in a time of war. The South Koreans, thank God, can still build ships. But I think they're a shockingly big percentage of like Western Alliance shipbuilding production. So Melanie Joly isn't wrong. There is, in theory, an argument for a dramatically expanded Canadian shipbuilding industry. But there's one argument against it. It's the existing Canadian shipbuilding industry. And I'm not trying to piss off the Irvings or whatever.
Well, we would be the sort of people who would piss off the Irvings. So let's just embrace that role for ourselves.
I just think in a very global, big picture way, if you ever find yourself saying something along the lines of the fate of democracy now rests on Canadian shipbuilding, you're fucked.
Yes, you've ceded the point. Yes, we're done now.
It's time to download Russian or Chinese on Duolingo and just embrace your future.
But Russian or Chinese, that's the real question.
Yeah, maybe both. Hedge your bets.
Maybe both.
We should all learn Esperanto. Bring Esperanto back. So am I open-minded in theory to federal money being used to cultivate and incubate Canadian or allied military production capability? Absolutely. But I just keep colliding with my conviction that it's going to turn into just more of what we've seen in recent years. Canadian shipbuilders right now are building ships. They are, apparently, by all accounts, pretty good ships, but they're at capacity. The ships are late. They're on the low end of tactical capabilities.
And they're wildly more expensive than
And they're late, they're expensive, and they're underarmed.
Can you give me a sense, just as the expert, Mr. Mann, could you give me a sense of just how much more expensive Canadian ships are versus comparative models, maybe better capable models on the open market? Say if we were to rely on all of our shipbuilding ships from South Korea.
I know what you're asking, but doing a direct apples to apples comparison is almost impossible.
I know Perun did a recent thing on the Canadian military and broke down all of our procurement problems. And he pointed out that very basic ships were coming in billions over what even roughly comparable ships were coming in at.
Yeah. What I would basically say is that Canada continually spends a premium on ships that arrive later and are less capable than what our allies are getting for similar amounts of money. And I can explain this to you actually, and it's not hard to explain, and it's not Canadian. Like, you don't have to be rending your garments to understand this. The problem with Canadian shipbuilding has traditionally been when we want to build a new fleet of ships. So okay, these ships are old. We need to build a dozen new warships. First, you spend billions and billions and billions of dollars building the industry that will then build the ships. And all of that money, all the facilities, the technology, the workforces, the training, all of that stuff goes into creating shipyards that have skilled workforces that can build the ships. But the cost of all that stuff gets divided across the number of ships built. So if we actually had, and this is kind of what the Koreans have been doing, the Koreans have large, thriving shipyards that are just constantly cycling in orders. So costs get amortized across like a large group of orders. Canadians typically haven't done that. But also the reality of it is, and I don't think I'm revealing any state secrets here. We all know, and you and I have talked about this before, Canadian military procurement really is Canadian regional economic financial disbursement.
Yeah. This is really about just propping up poor areas of the country. It's not really about the outcomes of the ships. That's not the purpose of the exercise.
When I see Melanie Joly talk about new Canadian shipyards to support national and allied security, I am envisioning tens of billions of Canadian dollars being spent to create Canadian shipyards. whether or not we actually end up with any warships.
Yeah.
Whether or not we or any ally end up with warships at the end of the process, well, who knows?
So here's the thing that I would just point out, and I would go a little bit more bird's eye on all of this, is that I recently saw this report for, I believe it was MLI, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, that said that by their measure, something like 65% of the Canadian economy was more or less dependent on some form of government. Like the majority, we are increasingly a centralized economy, right? Where your ability to do well and to perform well depends as much on your access to political capital and political power as it does in your ability to actually make or do shit, right? I've made this point many times before, but we in the media sector saw some small portion of how that actually functions in real time when we saw C-18 come into effect, where the people who had incumbency capacities and a higher degree of power by virtue of the political capital that they had accrued over decades, if not centuries, were essentially able to come into a lobbying position at an absolutely redeemable advantage over younger opening players, and were able to try and steamroller the government into passing legislation that allowed them to prop up their absolutely failing business models under the argument that, like, if you guys just keep us going a little longer, we'll bridge into the new world any day now. And anybody who meanwhile has read like a quarterly statement from some of the legacy players would be able to point out that that's bullshit. There is no bridge
to nowhere.
It's a bridge to nowhere is what it is. It's like effectively what we've created here is a subsidized model for people who have created an industry that is about siphoning taxpayer subsidies and taxpayer dollars back into financial vehicles that disproportionately benefit, American hedge funds. And increasingly low quality. Yeah. To pick one example that shall remain nameless, and like the capacity to produce high quality journalism is a kind of increasingly tangential byproduct of that business arrangement. So again, it's not actually a vibrant, thriving industry anymore. It's a rentier economy, right? Mm-hmm. And again, we'll plug the line a little bit here. The line is one of the very, very, very few, and I mean, we're counting on one hand, media outlets in this country that does not take government subsidies. We are totally transparent in terms of how we make our money here. It's subscription funding, and it's advertising. And when we advertise to you, we are totally transparent about the fact that we are advertising to you. Like, there's no sponsored content here. Nobody's getting paid, to run any of our editorial. But when we run advertising, it's clear advertising.
Yep. Anything we've ever run that is SponCon has been marked, and every commercial we add is explicitly linked to the person funding it.
Yeah, we are very, very transparent about that. Mm-hmm. Increasingly, you'd have legacy media partners that are not transparent about that fact, about the fact that they're being
some
paid
of the
to
newbies
run
aren't that transparent either.
Some of the newsbees aren't transparent about that as well. So look, we're all trying to navigate our way through these systems. Anyway, I don't want to have this be derailed into a conversation about media. But the thing later. That I would say that comes later. But the thing that I would say is, like, increasingly so much of the Canadian economy is effectively some variation of this story, right? Like, and the end result of all of this is we have a very low productivity economy. We're a very comparatively low innovation economy. And there doesn't seem to be a way out of the trap that we've set for ourselves, right? Because we're unwilling to allow anybody to fail. And the end result
politicians get blamed when things fail.
Because politicians get blamed when things fail.
Yeah.
So we're in the situation where you've now got a Mark Carney at the head of the game saying, well, we need to make all of these investments. We need to build Canada out. We need to make ourselves more competitive, innovative. This is, elbows up, wartime, blah, 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 blah. But the only way that we seem to have to be able to conceptualize a way out of the problem, to make ourselves more innovative and more productive and to build things, is by doubling down on the things that made us non-productive and not innovative in the first place. Right? It's to create an even more governmentally dependent and centralized economy, right? In which, your access to capital will matter even more, right? So we're spending maybe the money in a better way on infrastructure and on things that we need, like defense. but we haven't actually addressed the underlying corruption of the system. And we haven't fundamentally addressed what has made us so incapable of moving quickly, breaking things, and building stuff, right? We've just quadrupled down on all of the pre-existing catalysts that have gotten us to a place where we're kind of stagnant and mid.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you went down this path, because, like I said to you at the beginning, this is about defense procurement, but it's not. One of the reasons I've been thinking about this since the pandemic, and this is a story I've mentioned in various versions on the podcast before, but like very, very early in the pandemic, I was part of very interesting calls where we were trying to kind of figure out where our systemic societal vulnerabilities were, and whether or not Canadian food supply and food processing and agriculture, et cetera, whether or not they were going to be stable in sort of a worst case scenario. This was the first week or two of the pandemic when we didn't really know what we were dealing with. And people since then and since have been making the argument, like, don't knock supply management. Like, it's great to have a domestic food security. That's like having your ability to like meet basic nutritional needs is a really good thing to have. And it's like, I don't disagree with that in theory. And I don't disagree in theory with having domestic military production. But the problem is, in practice, what we end up with is not domestic food security. What we end up with is the dairy cartel. Yeah. And when we talk about having domestic military production capacity, what we end up with is not, like a bunch of really effective shipyards cranking out next generation warships for Canada and its democratic allies. We end up with the Irvings basically needing the next 15 years to build 15 ships. Like the national shipbuilding strategy, I don't even know what the world's going to look like by the time it finishes delivering the ships we began working on a decade ago. Like we have, so it's very easy to say, we have to foster domestic military capacity. Yeah, okay. But that military capacity needs to be fast, nimble, cost effective, competitive, and cutting edge. And that is the part that never gets paid attention to here. If you want to sell me on national food security, I've got a very open mind to that.
Well, and also the other thing I would just say further to this,
we end up with is cheese that costs a fortune
and bad butter. Look, I mean, the other thing I would just say is the effective, nimble, and cutting edge. If you can't create a domestic capacity that is those things, then you're actually worse off than you were before, because now you've squandered huge amounts of your collective capital on not increasing your overall capacity, when you actually would have been better off, as I said, just buying the ships from the South Koreans. You know what I mean? Or, anyway, the other thing I would just say, because you got started on supply management, you knew what you were doing with that. You could just, all right, here we go. I mean, look, the only argument for supply management, the only good argument for supply management is domestic food security. It's a domestic food security argument. Every other argument for supply managed dairy is nonsensical and bullshit. There's no actual good, consistent argument for it, except for the food security argument. The problem I have with that is that in a country like Canada, with the agricultural resources that Canada has, if you can't create a high food security environment in a country as wealthy, large, and agriculturally rich as Canada, as blessed as Canada, using ordinary capitalistic means, starve us all now. You know what I mean? Like you're really going to tell me that if the zombie apocalypse comes in, that we're all going to starve to death without the dairy cartel? Really? Is that honestly your argument to me? Like, I think we've got more farmland per capita than any other country, and it's not close. Like the kind of emergency scenario that you are envisioning, where real food security or famine, becomes an issue that we need to think about. Canada might be uniquely well equipped to deal with that kind of a scenario, given the land mass and the resources that we have access to. Like the only argument for food security, the only argument for supply management is the food security argument. And there's no country that I think should be less concerned about food security than Canada. We will have to have fucked the dog to an extraordinary degree to make our entire agriculture system fundamentally not capable of transitioning to an independent food security situation.
That will not be the headline for the podcast today.
Okay.
There are other examples kind of related to it, though. Like we talk about supply management, we talk about defense. Similar arguments get made for things like energy security.
Oh, great. National Energy Program version 2. Love that for us.
No Canadian government has ever screwed up something. Pharma is an example. Okay. That might actually be something we're doing relatively good at in terms of cost of drugs. Meanwhile, we've spent about a decade of political capital not getting pharmacare. So I think we could be doing better on that front here. I think the other side of the equation, though, well, not the other side, but another facet to it is just, you're talking about food security, or we're talking about defense procurement, we're talking about energy. If you want to extol these things on the virtue of enhancing Canadian sovereignty, okay. But what I'm going to ask, very politely ask, even God forbid I may insist, is that we talk about what the costs are. So if we're going to have Melanie Jolie's dream vision of a shipyard in every harbor, what's it going to cost? And what are we going to get for it? And I just don't mean cost. Money.
We mean opportunity costs.
Opportunity costs.
What are the opportunity costs of that?
Because, Jen, I agree with you entirely. The only argument in favor of supply management is food security. But what we don't talk about is what that means is that you and I have spoken on this podcast in recent years about the rising cost of groceries. But we're doing that in a relatively privileged, I'll use the term, position. The cost of groceries on a weekly basis is not going to make or break my family budget. We've got enough flex that we can do that. That's not true for a lot of Canadians. And supply management increases the cost of staple goods. So let's talk about cost, not just cost in terms of subsidies and money, but is it worth having a national food security system that is paid for by the poor? Because that's effectively what we have now. And also,
one of the opportunity costs of our system is the opportunity costs of not having a more globally competitive agricultural system, for example. One of the opportunity costs we can't quantify is the comparative low quality of our butter, which you and I can go on about at some length. Can I also just make like a side rant about all of this? Can I just
can I say one? Yes, but can I say one thing first?
You got me going about supply management. That was an error.
About energy. Mm-hmm. The unexpected cost of an attempt to make Canada more energy sufficient or sovereign was probably 90% of Jen's column archive, because she's been writing about the effect on Alberta politics her entire life and Canadian politics. That's a cost too. So I'm not saying if we build another shipyard in Halifax or something that like Alberta's going to separate, but there are costs to all of these things. And I've been reading, even in the summer, because I hate myself, I'm reading the newspapers, I'm reading the aggregators, and I keep just this morning. One of the reasons I want to talk about this on the podcast, I didn't look past the headline. It was in an aggregator, so I don't even know where it was from, but it was some headline like Canadian defense spending must be used to like bootstrap Canadian R&D, research and development. And that's kind of like, it's just another example, Jen. Like I'm with you in theory, but I'm just saying, can we also make sure that part of Canada's increased defense spending goes to defending Canada?
How about,
if we keep attaching all these other...
No, we need to create a defense supercluster, Matt. It'll work much better than the other superclusters this time, I promise.
I just want to know that by the time we're done spending all this extra money on defense, we actually have more defense.
Look,
and I'm not convinced.
All we've promised NATO is that we're going to spend 2% of GDP on defense. That doesn't mean that we're going to spend. That doesn't mean we're going to spend the money becoming more capable at defense.
Yeah, the military will shrink, but our supercluster is amazing.
Yeah, there you go. That's what they were really looking for.
All right, do your side rant.
I want to do a side rant. It's a side rant. It's a side rant that was based on I was flipping through the radio while I was driving my kids to summer camp, and I came across a conversation on the CBC about supply management. And it made me angry, so angry that I had to turn it off, because to me it was so indicative of the fundamental difference in terms of what I think the role of journalism ought to be. And that is
imagining what you must have looked like behind the wheel for someone who is not in your car.
Yeah, no.
Pounding
It
the
was
steering wheel.
a bad moment to cut me off in traffic. Look, so it was some pro supply management source here who was talking about, the journalist was saying, well, all these experts are saying that supply management increases the cost of groceries, and the experts' counter argument was, well, yeah, but the cost of groceries has gone up even for stuff that isn't supply management. And the reporter or the interviewer, rather than challenge the obvious problem with that argument by going at it on first principles, instead said, but here I have this quote from this expert that says that it increases the cost of groceries. So how do you respond to this quote from this expert? And to me, it was such fucking brain dead journalism that I wanted to die inside. Because no, your job is not to quote experts at one another. Sometimes your job is to actually challenge the arguments of the person you're interviewing. And the arguments of the person you're interviewing, you can tell using your own brain, are dumb. Yes, everyone understands that supply managed goods only apply to eggs, cheese, chicken. Like we're aware that we're only talking about one particular subsection of goods here. But just because the cost of
subsection.
But we're talking about that subsection. Yeah. And just because the cost of goods of non-supplied managed goods has also gone up doesn't necessarily justify or defend the cost of supply managed goods also going up. In fact, it does exactly the opposite. If the purpose of the supply management is to increase food security, I should expect the cost of supply management goods to go down or be stable in a time
to not move in lockstep with the market.
In lockstep with the market. And in fact, that would be the argument for your continued existence. Hey, look, while all the cost of all the other goods are going up, the cost of eggs, dairy, and chicken remains stable because of your high quality, supply managed Canadian dairy system. But that's not what happened. Now, is it? And if you had used your fucking brain, you would have been able to challenge him on this point. But instead, all of journalism now isn't about the journalist actually feeling empowered to use their brain to challenge people on the merits of their own arguments. Instead, now it's all been reduced to either furthering a particular activist agenda, right or left, or it's become a game of who can pit the right experts against the other experts. And I think it's stupid and a waste of time, and I'm bored with it, and it makes me angry. And that's the end of my side rant. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
We're going to talk about journalism in segment 3, but man, Jen is raring to go. She segment 2 is going to fly by because every point I'm going to make, Jen's going to be fine, skip it. Let's go to segment 3.
No, we are going to talk about, segment 2 here. We're about to get into the Late Show canceling Stephen Colbert. I mean, end of the era. I realize
CBS canceling the whole.
Oh, CBS. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're talking a little bit about Epstein just because we got to get in there. I realize these are mostly American topics, but you know what? The American late night TV is pretty relevant to Canadians as well, as Mark Carney demonstrated to us yet again when he launched his leadership campaign on the Daily Show. So I think it's worthwhile for us to get into, and then we are going to talk a little bit about Canadian media again. So, but stick with us, like and subscribe, follow us after the break because we are going to get into some slightly more American political events. You may enjoy that. You may enjoy following us along that particular line.
You might hate it, but we're doing it anyway.
Do it anyway. All right. Talk soon.
This episode of the Line Podcast is also brought to you by Forestry for the Future. Canadian forestry supports 200,000 workers, generates $87 billion in annual revenue, contributes $21 billion annually to our nation's economy, and provides the products we need to build homes and drive economic growth. While trade barriers from the U.S. are siphoning jobs and investment away, Canada's own approval processes and regulations are preventing critical projects that both prevent wildfires and boost our economic self-reliance. We can and should have programs that expand domestic wood use, advance biomass use and pulp market opportunities, and cut red tape and regulatory barriers. The Government of Canada has a clear opportunity to stand up for Canadian forestry at a time of growing global uncertainty. We need real action that puts Canadians first, supporting employees and their families, securing stability for our businesses, and protecting the long-term potential of our sector and its people. To learn more, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. First I want to fix my collar. I want to talk about Stephen Colbert and the Late Show, except I don't actually really want to talk about either of those things. So it was announced this week by Colbert himself that the Late Show is being canceled. And it's not that this is not one of these other host replacement drama things. It's not like Conan is not going to end up getting screwed over again. Like CBS says it intends to end the Late Show. And there's an interesting sidebar to this that I should probably care more about, but I don't, which was that Colbert just a couple of days ago had criticized the parent company of CBS for settling a lawsuit with President Trump. And there's obviously speculation, very reasonably so, that this is punitive because he criticized the parent company. They're shutting down his show. We can talk about all those things, I guess, if you want. And we will maybe in a few minutes when we talk about the Epstein stuff. But it also just kind of occurred to me as a journalist. 20 years ago, if you had canceled the Late Show, that's A1 News across the world. When Conan and Leno were having their battle, that was mainstream news. Let me ask you a question, Jen. You are a middle-aged mother, professional, business-owning journalist. Do you care about the Late Show getting canceled? Is that culturally relevant to you?
It's not. It hasn't been called. And do you want to know why? Because these guys stopped being funny.
Is it? I don't know.
Okay, so no, what I think happened, honestly, is, we don't like to talk about woke here no more. We don't like to talk about woke here no more.
You're doing the Disney thing, right, Bruno?
Yeah, that's the we don't talk about Bruno.
Okay, just checking.
But the problem is that we know and can now say with, without blinking too much, is that a lot of institutions, particularly cultural institutions, got ideologically captured by a kind of movement. A lot of that movement was well-intentioned. It was rooted in a desire for more, equality and to right injustices and all that kind of stuff. But sort of nestled into that movement was a pretty rigid and almost religious kind of identitarian politics that sought to sort of restructure society around new power roles. And the problem with that wasn't the intention of a lot of it. The intention of it was good. The problem was that, like all new religious movements, it was highly fanatical at some points and highly rigid. And new fanatical movements don't tend to lend themselves to humor very well. And so a lot of the cultural institutions that really got captured by this stuff stopped being funny. Stopped being funny a lot. Increasingly became pious and self-assured. And people don't like that. People don't like that. A lot of the reason why what I would call like the cultural right, and even some of the most pernicious and vile aspects of the cultural right, was able to take off in the way that it did, is because, they kept their sense of humor. They were funny. And they tied that humor to incredibly vile aims. But humor is effective. Humor brings people along. So the cultural institutions that kind of went broke? No, basically the cultural institutions that even took on board a lot of the kind of ideological fervor of high wokeness of the 2020s, lost grasp of their actual mandate. And I think the Late Show, not to say the Late Show went like uber woke or anything, it didn't, but it kind of neutered itself. It deballed itself. A lot of these movements did. I mean, the only kind of late night talk show host that I think is still funny and still watchable is Jon Stewart. And, I can point to a couple of things that Jon Stewart did sort of between 2020 and 2025 where I went, eh. But on the whole, he was a guy who managed to maintain his sense of self and his sense of humor, despite what was happening in the ideological currents around him. And a lot of people on the left turned on him for this point. But the guy's still relevant and funny. So, which is why, even though he doesn't have his own necessarily full-time Daily Show anymore, and like there's other hosts that come on board, when the Daily Show, YouTube stuff pops up, I'll generally still watch it. It's still relevant to me. But yeah, that's what happened to a lot of these types of cultural institutions, right? Like if you build an entire audience, an entire raison d'etre around the idea of being funny, you need to still be funny. And Stephen Colbert hasn't been funny in at least 5 years. I don't think I've cracked up or laughed at a single Stephen Colbert joke in 5 years. It's death now.
I think
it's death. I mean, John Oliver is another example of this. A guy used to be super funny on The Daily Show. 2020 rolled along, and now like his stuff, it's not even humor anymore. It's just droning, preachy. I can't sit through it anymore. It's not funny. Jon Stewart is still funny, but I mean, a lot of the most transgressive humor now is coming from what has been relabeled as the right. So
I don't think I disagree with any of that, but I think my approach to it was just different, which was, I think if Stephen Colbert was still really conventionally funny, I still think late night TV is dead. And I just, I have a friend of mine works in the entertainment industry at a senior level, and she was telling me once she's around our age, she's a bit older than us, but she's around our age. And when we were growing up, you would have TV shows that would be getting like 12% of the audience when it was on the air. That's the share, they would call it. There'd be ratings and share. So you'd have a high rating, you'd get 12% of the audience for, say, Wednesday night at 8. You'd get 12% of the audience, and you'd get canceled because they'd be like, that's not enough. We need 17%. We need 20%. Now, if a TV show, and that show would have like 20 million viewers, right? Now, if a TV show has 4 million viewers, it's a success because the audience attention has been fragmented in like a quadrillion different directions. So I'm not disagreeing with you about woke or humor or all that stuff. Like, I think that's accurate and fair, but I'm also just kind of more noting the fact that I think we as a society lack centralizing gravitational pull of broadly successful mass media.
That's been true for years now. I mean, we already crossed the Rubicon. I think we crossed the Rubicon.
Oh, no, I agree with that. But I think I would say, look, there was a bit of a tail of that, right? Like we crossed the Rubicon a while ago, but when we crossed the Rubicon, no one canceled The Late Show. That took longer.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, let's put it this way. Late night TV is dead in the same way that podcasts killed the radio talk show. They said 35 minutes into their radio talk show. You know what I mean? That's going to happen. Yeah. Just be streamed on their podcast. Like, there's still room for this kind of humor, this kind of like take on the news, humorous show. It just isn't necessarily going to be a mass media, a centralizing figure that's broadcast on a major network. It's instead going to be something that's going to rack up 12 million clips in 10-minute intervals on YouTube. The distribution models have changed, disintermediation has changed the audience and the audience approach, and it's changed a lot of things about how these shows are structured. But the fundamental idea that you have funny man get behind desk, talk about the news of the day, I don't think that's going anywhere. I just think some of these guys are going to need to get funnier, or going to have to start embracing funny again. I mean, what was the other sort of what I would call late night type comedian that's actually done very well in recent years was the guy with the caustic sense of humor? The gray hair? No. I'm
British, American TV,
American television. He has his own show now. It's almost totally digital. Christ, my brain. Okay, I'm sorry. Forget it. You know what? Ignore it. Fill in your own blanks on this.
Can you give me any other hint? I could probably tell you who it was.
Fill in your own blanks. It doesn't even matter. The point being is like, look, humor is inherently transgressive, which means humor by its nature has to flow against the cultural norms of the moment. Humor has to explore the shadow side of humanity. And a comedian who's unwilling to sort of peer deeply and honestly into the shadow side of any movement, regardless of how well-intentioned that movement is a comedian that's soon going to find himself out of a job. That's all that's happened with Stephen Colbert. Now, we can talk about also the degree to which maybe Trump was influential in him losing his job, because, I mean, CBS, we know, like, kind of paid this weird bribey style lawsuit to the Trump administration. They bent the knee. Yeah, they bent the knee, and then Colbert criticized them for it, and then he rapidly gets fired shortly afterwards.
That's 2 days later.
Yeah, that's obviously, if that is in fact the motivation, that's obviously borked. I mean, okay, one step further toward Orbanism by the Americans. Well done, everyone. So like no one would defend that. However, I would say like, look, your ability to withstand political pressure in an environment that is becoming increasingly fascistic is going to be deeply dependent on the value that you maintain to the society at large and to the economic value that you maintain to the company that supports you. So let's, Stephen Colbert would be much, much harder to fire if he were still funny. That would be kind of my take on it.
Or if he had 17% of the audience.
Or if he had 17% of the audience. Can Stephen Colbert take his shtick and create a wildly successful YouTube channel? Potentially, he could have an audience there, but then I still think he would need to get funnier. So you kind of can't avoid this problem.
What I look, you gave great content there. You took it in a direction I wasn't expecting. I was thinking more just in terms of, it's funny. I have no interest in going to church, not religious, but I wish more of you went to church. Like I sort of wish our society had a little more of a communal shared experience, religiosity to it. I just personally have no interest. I have no interest in watching The Late Show. I have no interest in watching any of them, and I never have. I don't think I've seen an episode of SNL in 30 years. I don't know if I've paid any attention to The Late Show host in 30 years. But I don't know if it's a good thing for our society that we do not have anything that's shared anymore.
Well, and you want to know what we call that, Matt? Revealed preference. Speaking of revealed preference, Epstein, I don't know if you want to just...
Ew. Gross.
but kind of funny.
Jen went for the very blunt segue on that one, but by all means, discuss some revealed preferences here, Jen.
So look, we would not be the only or the last political comment. Shit. See, that's how. Anyway, look, to talk about what's happening down in the States around Jeffrey Epstein. The FBI came out with this memo that basically says there's no here, there's no client list. The client list that all of Trump's lackeys have been promising for the last 10 years doesn't actually exist. Here's a video of Jeffrey Epstein's jail to show that nobody went in or out. And then, of course, we later find out that the video clip has 3 minutes edited out. Whee! So, look, couple things that are interesting for me to note. One is this is the first real story to break where I think MAGA land has split. MAGA land is, how shall I say this, for the first time, not slavishly listening to what the government led by Trump is telling them, and in fact starting to embrace some degree of critical analysis on some of the things he says and does. Good. Let's keep at that. That's fantastic. Really glad to see. And the reason why I think this particular betrayal cuts so deep is because so much of MAGAland was, how should I say this, to some extent bought in on the QAnon conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Right.
Pizzagate.
So the idea that
we're going to save the children from the pedophile.
We're going to save the children
by the
from
Democrats.
the pedophiles. Yeah, from the satanic cabal of Democrats who are actually, using government to run, these extensive child sex trafficking rings. And as someone who's just finished the final chapter, at least the draft of the final chapter for her book, woohoo! I've been paying attention to the Epstein stuff. And one of the points that I try to make in my book here, which is about the Satanic Panic, and I think that QAnon is a pretty direct lineal descendant of the Satanic Panic. One of the things that I think I note in the book, or try to note, is that all moral panics and conspiracy theories are usually rooted in something true. Like they're all rooted in something true. The problem with the moral panic is that it's a disproportionate response to a real problem. And when I look at, for example, Jeffrey Epstein, like that Jeffrey Epstein was engaging in child trafficking is, I think at this point, demonstrably legally true. Ghislaine Maxwell, his cohort, or his partner in crime, is now in prison for it. This is beyond dispute. That this sex trafficking ring involved people in elite positions, that is beyond dispute. We know that this is true. We also know that this is a guy who hung around with a lot of elites, and not every elite whom he hung around with was necessarily going back to his private island to engage in sexually licentious behavior. But some of them were. I, for one, don't think Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. I think that it's probably true that someone killed him. And someone with access to extraordinary power killed him. I think that is a reasonably high probability likelihood.
It's the version, you know what? Look, I don't know what happened. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but every time some Russian dissident falls out a window, I don't take that at face value.
Well, that's right. Exactly right. That's right. We don't need this. So the question always is like, look, how do you separate the conspiracy from the conspiracy theory? Right? Conspiracies happen. Conspiracy theories are crazy. But that doesn't mean conspiracies don't actually happen. So like one of the things that I find so tragic about the QAnon phenomenon is that you have so many people who are genuinely coming at it from the right place. Like their heart is in the right place. They want to stop one of the biggest crimes and one of the most horrific crimes you could possibly imagine. And that's child sex trafficking. Child sex trafficking is a thing. It happens. It does. Is the entire Democratic Party but there's a difference between saying like child sex trafficking is a thing that happens and we should devote resources to combating it, and saying the Democrats are a cabal of Satan worshiping sex traffickers who are trading in human flesh in order to suck the adrenochrome from the pineal gland. Like, you know what I mean? Like one of these things is like a grounded, real problem that people who are sane and good-hearted are actually caring about for good and appropriate reasons. And then this gets crazy when you go from that egg to like the tree of the underlying disproportionate conspiracy that they're building around these things, right? So the Epstein stuff is really, really interesting because it's difficult for someone who's writing about the satanic panic and trying to point out that, you know, a lot of what you're claiming about the whole Satan worshiping cabal, that's kind of bullshit. But at the same time, yes, there are people who are engaged in this awful stuff. And, you know, there are, you know, groups that do worship Satan. That is a thing that happens. But it's not nearly what you think it is. You're taking these like disparate, totally fringe or disconnected ideas and throwing them together into a massive narrative that you have no evidence to support. And anyway, I'm trying to explain that in a way that makes sense for my book, and it's really, really hard because it's trying to inject a lot of nuance and sincerity into a highly polarized and highly emotive situation. So I just watched the Jeffrey Epstein stuff with a lot of interest, and you know, I would say this just to end it off with, it's interesting to me what the political impact of this is going to be on Trump's base, and the political impact this is going to have on, you know, there are QAnon conspiracy videos that treat the Donald like he is a messianic figure who was brought into his position in order to unveil the deep state sex trafficking pedophile rings. And for him to be like, yeah, move on from the Epstein stuff is a real departure from that kind of narrative. And it's going to be one that I think is almost impossible for some people to follow.
You're deeper on the cult element of this than I am. I'm fascinated by it. Like, I've dipped my toes a little bit into reading about the QAnon stuff. For our listeners and viewers who haven't, let me just try to describe it to you in a couple of sentences. It's like fan fiction.
Yeah.
It's like reading about Donald Trump and being asked to believe by people who apparently believe this with complete sincerity, that his entire public persona is a lie and that he is basically a soldier for Christ who has been put here by God to defeat a satanic cabal of child exploiting sinners, and that he is leading a secret army of and I don't mean in a metaphorical sense. I mean, he has like a secret military force that is going to rise up and purge America of its satanic influence. And you read this, and for the well-adjusted person, it seems bonkers. But there are people out there who actually believe this. And I think I mentioned this to you before, Jen, but on the day of of Joe Biden's inauguration, I was monitoring with one eye. It was a Reddit or it was something. I don't remember what the website was, but it was a QAnon forum. And I was just looking at people having psychotic breaks in real time. They're like, where are the black helicopters? Why hasn't Trump arrived to disrupt the inauguration? Okay, guys, when will Biden be arrested? And they were nuts. I think to your point a minute ago about denial, like conspiracies are real. The problem with the conspiracy theorists is that they go maximally in a direction, but maximalist denial is usually equally stupid. Like there's often a grain of truth in some of this stuff. And I'm not endorsing
Yes.
every conspiracy, because some of them are
No.
purely insane and bullshit.
No, but it's almost impossible for a conspiracy to take root unless it's rooted in something real. Like, it's totally, you don't see conspiracy theories about Santa Claus, right? That
we could
because
start
there's
one, make
there's
money off
nothing
of
to
it.
build on there, right? Like, there's nothing to go on. The other thing that I would just note is that one thing that I do a lot of research on now is how cults respond to failed prophecies. And this is a really, really fascinating thing. Yeah, but here's a really, really interesting point, because there's tons of interesting literature from both inside and outside of cults about, one thing that cult leaders almost consistently do, like pernicious, really high control pernicious groups. What they really do is they consolidate control over a group by making end time prophecies. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something about apocalyptic end time prophecies that creates like a super glue of social cohesion, and unity, and control.
I mean, the stakes are high enough.
Yep. Look, it's the literal end of the world. Are you in or are you out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is something about that kind of end of the world kind of language.
Sell your business, abandon your family, leave all your obligations behind. We're all dead in 4 years anyway.
And then once, exactly, right? Like, it's all going to end in 4 years. It's a really consistent hallmark of high control groups that they do this. It's apocalypse, imminent, stated. This is the day, the moment's going to happen. What happens in these control groups when the day comes and the apocalypse doesn't happen? Well, you have really, really awful groups like Jim Jones or like Heaven's Gate or whatever that kill themselves. Like they off themselves, they unalive themselves. En masse,
the Heaven's
for example.
Gate ones were the ones who unalived themselves because they thought their souls would be ascending as the spaceship went by.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So now Heaven's Gate, it wasn't necessarily they were as apocalyptic, but there was an assumption that like there was a firm end date in mind where the spaceship was going to be behind the Hale-Bopp comet, and so they had to get off by then, and that was that. Jim Jones was like, well, we've killed a government official. They're going to come in and kill us all now. So, here's the off-brand Kool-Aid. And that was a particularly horrific one. But
I'm glad you knew it was off-brand. That's a bit of trivia.
That's
true. Flavor Aid.
It was Flavor Aid. And then you get groups that don't go fully suicidal, and instead, the prophecy comes and they pass. And what's fascinating is that the rational person in this situation from the outside would be like, okay, so the prophecy's been disproven. You can all go home now, right? But that's not what happens. Because by the time someone's at the point where they're, in the bunker having sold all their goods and chips, they're so locked into the ideology, they're so locked in that they can't just pull themselves back once the prophecy doesn't get proven. So instead, you get the leader comes in and said, our prayers have been answered. We have managed to prevent the apocalypse by virtue of our goodwill. Good job, everybody. Now get back to work. Some of them will peel off at this point, but groups that actually manage to survive a failed prophecy prediction actually have a tendency to quadruple down and become that much more controlling, that much more possessive, that much worse, that much more pernicious. Like,
the few that break away mean only the purest believers are left.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's now the true believers are the only ones still clinging to life here. It's a really fascinating aspect of human psychology. And I'm so interested, and this is why I find it so interesting from a political point of view. Are the true believers in Trump finally going to start to go like, okay, this guy ain't releasing the Epstein files. He wasn't what I thought.
Yeah.
Or do they do what cult leaders tend to do? And they're like, no, Trump is now playing 60 chess. Right?
Well, see, you bring to it your knowledge of cults and the satanic panic.
My extensive knowledge.
Yeah. I just view it as pure politics, right? And one of the things I've been noting this week, not paying a ton of attention to it, but paying some, a couple of observations I'm going to make. First of all, what Trump is saying doesn't make any sense. And I just don't mean that because I understand that Trump says weird things sometimes, but his own defenses are not internally consistent, and his conspiracy mongering followers are going to note that. One of the things he's saying is that there is no list. The other thing he's saying is that the Democrats made it up. So that's not going to work forever. I think to your point, and I think you've articulated it really, really well, If this blows wide open and the Wall Street Journal has begun publishing some stuff that Trump's denying, he says he's going to sue, blah, blah, blah. But the Journal is a reputable organization. They wouldn't be publishing stuff that hadn't gone through about 900 rounds of lawyering. The Journal is also a pretty conservative news source. That's going to be hard for some of the MAGA guys to dismiss. But my gut feeling, Jen, and this is sad, but this is my honest view of this, there may well be a lot of Republicans out there who are like, yeah, I don't really like Trump, but I vote Republican down the ticket. They might struggle with this. The true MAGA believers, they will adapt their views as necessary to maintain their loyalty to the leader.
Interesting. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, that's what I'm watching. I'm really, really interested about how they respond. I'm like popcorn, right? I'm fascinated. The other thing that I was just about to say before my brain went blank, which is the second time that's happened on this podcast, which is excellent for me. Nope, it's gone. Completely gone. Thank you. That's all I have to say about this.
Well, we'll be back in a minute. We actually are going to come back. We make a point of jokingly warning our listeners and our viewers when we're about to go off a bit of a rabbit hole. We're about to do that when we come back. We are going to talk a little bit more about the media, and we're warning you in advance because we know not all of you love that. Travis Dhanraj, broadcaster journalist, has recently left the CBC, or at least he's trying to. There's a little controversy brewing there. We're going to talk to you about it in a moment. This is the Lime Podcast. This episode of the Lime Podcast is also brought to you by Airbnb. Last week, we told you about the amount of Airbnbs that could be homes accounts for only 0.6 of Canada's housing stock. Everyone knows you can't solve a crisis with less than 1% of a solution. But did you know that Airbnbs actually play a critical role in helping Canadians navigate affordability? 77% of Airbnb hosts say that renting their homes helps them cover the rising cost of living. Learn more at airbnb.ca/closer look. Jen and I love podcasting so much. We go on other people's podcasts. Jen, a few days ago, you were on Shortcuts, Canada Land. You were on with Jesse Brown. I confess I have not heard the episode. I was out and about this week. I'm kind of behind on everything. The summer rush. But tell me, what were you guys talking about? Just give me a bit of a rundown of what was on Shortcuts.
I think the top line was definitely the story around Travis Dhanraj, who was a host at CBC, started to get into trouble when, at least publicly, when he started to criticize former CBC's president, Catherine Tate, for their executive bonuses in the midst of CBC cuts. And then there was a lot of silence from... Yeah, he was. And also then all of a sudden kind of Dhanraj went radio silent. I think his show went off air. I'd have to double check that. Anyway, there was a lot of weird silence around Travis. And in the last week or two, it's come out that Travis is now going to be pursuing some kind of human rights complaint within the CBC. He's claimed that he has resigned. From what I understand, the CBC has refused his resignation. And there seems to be a bit of a PR campaign afoot to try and suggest that Travis has all the receipts to demonstrate that, that CBC has become ideologically captured, that his ability to create a show that was had a wide degree of ideological diversity and a spectrum of opinions was undermined. And that, I think the crux of his claim essentially was that, this is an institution or an organization that claims to be diverse, but in fact, they're trying to just use people of different ethnicities and races as essentially avatars of a very narrow set of opinion, a very narrow ideological opinion. And this, of course, follows on, we've now seen, it's now become a bit of a genre of like CBC employees or media employees, ourselves included, quitting the mainstream media on complaints that are fairly similar to this and then starting their own thing out of it. I mean, the line, we were one of these people. So we can't criticize Travis on this point. The only thing that I think was interesting to note from the show and that I would follow on the conversation is that, it's really interesting to me that a couple of years ago, Tara Henley quit the CBC with essentially the exact same complaints, saying that, essentially the institution has become ideologically captured. There's a very, very narrow range of acceptable opinion that is permitted within the culture as a whole. And I can't live like that anymore. So she starts Lean Out at Tara Henley. It's done very well, like a Substack-based organization. And she was like, when she did that, she was treated as like media pariah, like enemy of the year for a solid like week or two. And now Travis, a couple years later, Travis quits basically on exactly the same grounds. And the response is, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Yeah, no shit. The CBC is ideologically captured and has a narrow focus, because you would have to fail the 2 IQ points and blind in one eye test to not see that. That's just now patently obvious. Which kind of brings us to
what a terrible test that is too.
Yeah, exactly right. So this is interesting to me. I think that we were going to get into the deeper strategy behind all of this. I think on the whole, Travis's allegations are probably correct. He's claiming he's got receipts, and I'm going to show you all kinds of weird stuff. We will see that as the human rights trial progresses. There's, I think, a pretty good chance that the CBC will just write him a check to make him go away. That's a whole other conversation. There's another interesting point in all of this. There's a reason why Travis is filing a human rights complaint instead of going for constructive dismissal. And apparently that's because the CBC is unionized. So you need to like grieve the process before you can be dismissed. So, but of course, if you believe that one of the major problems at the CBC is ideological capture, which it is, of course, the CBC union is a pretty serious consideration in the ideological capture front. So instead, he's kind of trying to do this as a human rights complaint. So whether or not it is a human rights complaint that has any merit in law, I mean, you and I aren't lawyers. We can't speak to that. There's a pretty good chance it's just going to get thrown out. There's a pretty good chance that this is mostly just a PR campaign by Travis to both wrestle some kind of settlement out of the CBC and also use it as an opportunity to launch his own career. And my response to that is, good on you. It'd be pretty hypocritical for us at the line to say, like, you don't do that. So he is playing a bit of a game. I think it's worthwhile for us to note that he's playing a game, and I think it's worthwhile for us to applaud him for playing the game, because if you're going to be an individual in this industry, it's pretty easy to get steamrollered by a massive corporation. So there you go. But I think what's more interesting in all of this, aside from the media conversation, is the underlying political conversation, because Travis has clearly hitched his complaint, his personal issues with the CBC, to the horse of an underlying political narrative, which is espoused deeply by conservatives and conservative-leaning people. CBC's out to get us. CBC is anti-conservative. CBC shouldn't be funded by taxpayer dollars if it isn't going to be representative of Canadians writ large. And to that end, I mean, his lawyer is Catherine Marshall, who has longtime links to the Conservative Party. And also, I mean, virtually every conservative media organization is I think, taking a lot of Travis's claims very much at face value and saying, look, Travis is coming with the receipts. He's going to prove that the CBC is not an institution that serves all Canadians anymore. And we'll see what those receipts show to us. I mean, as we have not been privy to the receipts themselves, it's impossible for us to make comment on it. The only thing that I would say is, like, my guess is that he does.
Yeah,
my guess is that he does. Just my understand, because I mean, I talk to people in the CBC, and they know me as a safe space to talk to, and I have been on the CBC. I've been on CBC panels. I've had my columns published by the CBC. So, from my perspective as an outsider, but albeit one who's reasonably well connected, duh.
Yeah.
Duh. Yeah, of course the CBC became considerably more ideologically captured in the last 5 years, and the range of acceptable opinions has radically narrowed and shifted to the left. And of course, the whole philosophical approach to its journalism has fundamentally changed. I don't think it's necessarily what conservatives automatically assume it is. I think it's a little bit more subtle than what a lot of people on the right claim it is. Like, the CBC isn't one unified institution. It's like 10 disunified institutions that are all at each other's backs and throats all the time.
So we're talking about before with the conspiracy theories, right? Like, there's some truth there, but I think the conservative conclusion is wrong.
Yeah, but like your response is often disproportionate, And also, you don't understand the underlying structure of the problem. Like the underlying structure of the problem is not that everyone at the CBC is a brain dead lefty. That's not the case at all. In fact, there's a lot of internal dissent in the CBC on a lot of the ideological issues. The problem is that, of course, it's the CBC isn't one entity. It's a bunch of competing entities that are all sort of struggling against one another for time, resources, and attention and power. And there are different factions within the CBC that are at each other's throats, and there's different geographic factions within the CBC that are all at each other's throats, right? So, but on the whole, I think that Travis's argument is grounded in probable fact. Like, do I think it's very likely that he got internal pushback for trying to put problematic figures on his show? Well, no shit, Sherlock. I mean, there was a couple years there where Jen Gerson was considered a problematic figure, and I know there was internal pushback for putting me on the line. And believe me, when Jen Gerson is considered too far over the line for you, I think you have problems internally. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
Couple of comments to make. One of them, it's a little bit of a confession, a little bit of an observation. But I don't know if the broader audience knows, and our friends in the media who are listening to this, they will know this, but I don't know if the broader audience knows how small and, figuratively speaking, incestuous Canadian media has become. Because we've referred to 3 individuals, other than you and I, by name in this segment. 4, technically, or we've alluded to them. Jesse Brown and Shortcuts were where we started. Then we're talking about Travis himself. We've mentioned Tara, and then we've mentioned Travis's lawyer, Catherine. I know all these people.
Yeah.
Like, it's a small club. Like,
it is.
I'm not saying I'm close friends with all of them or anything, but like, I have directly communicated on an ongoing basis at times with every one of those people. And I think I feel a little bit reluctant to make big sweeping statements here because I know them all and I don't want to be a dick. But the other thing I would say as a confession is that the main bulk of this story broke when I was in Europe and I missed the onset. So I kind of needed to lean on you a little bit while you were getting us caught up on some of the details here. I want to make a follow-on statement to something you said. Some of what we are seeing right now play out in public, and I have gone back and I've looked at Travis's statements. I agree with you, Jen, 100% that he probably has the receipts. I speak from experience. Media company managers are always shocked to discover that journalists and their employ are good at taking notes. And that has personally once worked out very much in my favor. So I don't know why media managers are constantly shocked to discover the journalists they employ are good at note taking, but they are.
Yeah, or like somehow you could turn off the journalist part of the brain in anything that you do. Like that's not. No, let me introduce you to my husband. When he bullshits me, I call him on it. I trust, but I verify. Like this is just who it is. What you're dealing with.
If Travis is saying he's got the goods, I believe him. What I would also say, though, is that, and this is just kind of, I've gone back and I've looked at what's been said since I got back from Europe. Travis has been very selective in what he's revealed. Mm-hmm. His lawyer, Catherine, is also being very careful in her statements. Now, she's a lawyer. I expect her to be careful in her statements. But I think, Jen, probably what you said before is true. A lot of this strikes me as the early phase of a battle for position. Yep. And it's possible that all of a sudden we get a statement from Travis or from Catherine and from the CBC saying all the matters between the parties have been resolved and everybody wishes each other well, and then no one hears about it ever again. Yep. That's a possible outcome for this. And if Travis gets a big check, good for him. I'm not knocking him for that. What I would also say, though, and I have spoken to Travis before directly, but I haven't about this since I got back from Europe. So I feel like a little bit like a jerk communicating with him via podcast. But what if I were advising him, advice that I would give him would be to not mistake 2025 for 2022.
That's right.
And we kicked off the line almost 5 years ago. We should actually talk about that. We should probably start thinking about our 5th anniversary coming up.
That's true.
But we launched this thing at probably, with hindsight, at the best possible moment. You've already mentioned Tara.
We timed it perfectly.
Yeah, we didn't mean to, but we ended up sticking the landing perfectly. I think Tara was a little bit behind us, but also
she got in the window.
Yeah, for Travis,
it's too late.
It might be.
The marketplace is now really crowded.
I don't know if he could do, and again, as Jenna said, we're well aware of our potential hypocrisy here. I don't know if Travis could do a Substack and a podcast shining a light on problems in the CBC. It's a pretty saturated field at this point. And I just hope he knows that. Well, the other thing, too, is that I think there are other potential avenues for him here. 100%.
He could take the Jamil Giovanni course. He could run for politics. There's always room for someone who can launch themselves into a comms or a strategic comms role here. So there's a lot of different paths. The problem is that you can't take that particular course and then expect to be rehired at CTV or any of these other places, which, by the way, is a problem. I mean, we have such a uber centralized media market. That's why I know every name we've mentioned. I know every name we mentioned. We know each other. We all know each other. We all know each other's dirty, laundry. But the end result is it can become a very insular club, and individuals can get blackballed really easily. Which means there's always a disincentive to sort of talk about bad conduct and bad behavior in major corporations, because that if you do that, good luck getting your next job. Look, of course, I have had. Jen, and look, I'm going to state the obvious here, and I don't think I'm revealing any trade secrets here, but I've had resumes land on my desk, and I've privately called the former boss. I'm like, "What do you think?" And they're like, "No," and I believe them. And I've also been in that situation where I've been called informally, of course. What do you think of this person? I know you worked with them before. Most of the time, I say, "Yeah, they're great. They were great. They were a pleasure to work with. Losing them was 100% a budget reality. Snap them up. They're great. They'll do you proud." A few times I've been like, do not hire that person. So it's a small club, and there are. It's a small club. And the only thing I just think that people need to be conscious of the fact is that, your capacity to leave quietly and politely depends a lot on your positionality, right? Travis is probably not going to be able to forge another path through mainstream media. And leaving the way he did, criticizing the way he did, the odds of him being blackballed were pretty high. He's got cash in his chips. So he's cashing in his chips, and he's playing the game to try and maximize his exposure on the way out. And good on him. Good on him. I honestly say that, play the game. You have to, because there are certain points where you have to play the game. It's just what it is in order to launch yourself and make sure that you have a place to land. And the other thing to say is because it's such a small incestuous community, it really disincentivizes us to be critical of anything or anybody. And that is part of what contributes to an overall very boring and milquetoast media culture, frankly. And the other thing I would say is not all the blackballs are fair or correct. Sometimes people leave for very good reasons from very toxic environments, and they get blackballed on the way out in order to silence them and undermine them. Yep. In ways
or just petty revenge.
Or just petty revenge.
Yeah, I know.
And people can have their careers, and people have had their careers destroyed absolutely unfairly simply because the industry is small. So, I have a lot of sympathy for someone in Travis's position. I think that if he had another option, he probably would have taken it. But
the industry I agree with every word of that. But let me just say something to you, and this is just a reality I'm acknowledging, not a knock on Travis at all, because everything you're saying is right. Even if I with 100% certainty believed everything Travis had said about the CBC was true, if I was a hiring manager at Global or CTV or whatever, do you hire the guy who made a big stink when he left his last job?
No, but that means once you're over the Rubicon, and once you've actually decided that it's do or die time.
That's why he's cashing in the chips. That's
why you got to cash in the chips wholly and heartily. And I would say even for myself, in my own career in the distant past, and I'm not even talking about the person you think I'm talking about here, but I might have been better off if I had left more loudly. I might have been better off, or I might have been in a much better position if I'd caused a fuss on the way out.
Knowing you as I do, I can think of 3 people you could be talking about.
Yeah, you don't even know who I'm talking to at this point, and I've always kind of maybe made a habit of not doing what Travis has done to some extent, and trying to keep the peace, at least publicly. Like what happened privately is maybe different, but like trying to keep the peace publicly and not trying to be shitty to people on the way out. And you know what? I'm not sure that habit served me very well. I'm not sure it did.
That's interesting. We at The Wine have never hesitated to attack institutions when they're fucking up. But one of the things we've done well, in my opinion, something like I'm proud of how we've handled it, is that we have not made a habit. Like I'm thinking of some in particular right now, but there are like blogs out there that just make a habitual habit of attacking either specific institutions or specific people as a way to like list build, right? We are the we hate these columnists. We hate this newspaper, stuff like that. We've never done that. You and I have been scrupulously fair in our criticisms, or at least we've tried to be. And we have never tried to tell anyone subscribe to The Line because we're the only ones who'll tell you the truth because all the others suck. We don't do that. We've given as much credit to our competition as shit.
And I think also at the same time, we're also pretty honest about our own blind spots and our own problems. I think we try to be, I think we try to be, as much as any human can do. Right. We make that self-criticism a factor of our ethic, and it doesn't mean that we always succeed. I'm not trying to be pompous about it.
Sometimes we could self-criticize better.
Sometimes we could self-criticize better. And I'm sure that one of our critic in our comment section will be able to point out point by point places where we could be more self-critical.
It'll be the same 2 or 3.
And we love them very dearly. But this is a fair point. I think there's a difference between criticizing institutions and taking potshots at individuals. The only thing that I would just say is, like, we also live in a pretty nasty industry that absolutely does blackball individuals who are just deemed to be problems. And some of those blackballs historically haven't been fair. And
something really interesting I got told years ago. One of the things we've had in recent years, and it's a little bit separate from the awakening or whatever the hell we ended up calling it, but we don't talk
about woke here no more. We don't talk about woke here.
There was a document that floated around the Canadian media years ago. It was called the Shitty Men in Media List or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. Remember that?
Yeah.
And that was sort of like an organic and natural response to the fact that media companies.
Yeah, it was the Me Too response, and there was an American version of this, and there was a Canadian version of this as well.
It might even have. You might remember the timing better, but I think it might have actually preceded the Me Too being called Me Too.
It was pretty early.
The reason I just bring this up is I got told once by a colleague, because I had worked for a company that seemed, and I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to be naive here or have rose-colored glasses, but I was working at the time for a company that seemed relatively free of those issues. And one of the things I was told by an old graybeard there was, this company has been through so many cycles of layoffs that managers over the year have found a way to solve their other problems under the guise of layoffs. So if there's someone who's problematic, well, you know what? He just happened to find himself on the list when accounting said head roll had to shrink. Companies that were more financially robust or unionized had a much harder time cleaning up subtly that kind of problem.
Yep.
And the reason I just bring this up is because over the years in dealing with media, some of these problems have been self-correcting and others haven't. And some of the
institutions have been better at self-correcting, and other institutions haven't. And
or have had the opportunity
and we're talking elliptically, but people who are in the club will know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And smart managers usually know who the problems are, but aren't always able to fix them. And in a weird way, journalism has started to look almost like police forces, where like police sergeants and captains usually know who the problematic patrolman is, but they can't get rid of them.
Can I also say one of the major problems that I've just noticed in media, and one of the reasons why certain institutions are better than others as well? You're right. I think high turnover has a tendency to purge the unclean a little bit faster. But the other thing that I think is one of the major differences is that if you are working for a media institution that has the attitude of you're just lucky to be here,
Mm.
You're just lucky to be here. Don't
Oh,
you
that's
know
the root
who
of
we
that's the
are?
root of exploitation. Man, words are hard
Not
today.
just media,
Exploitation
in every industry.
in every
If you
environment.
have an organization or an institution that goes through its life with an ethos of don't you know how lucky you are, then you have an institution that will inevitably be hijacked by abusive individuals.
Yeah.
And you will have an institution that will perpetuate exploitation on the weaker, inevitably. It doesn't matter. And also, I think, by the way, certain organizations that are highly devoted towards social justice aims are in fact worse at this problem than organizations that are not.
When I was talking a minute ago about institutions that were good at this and institutions that were bad at this, they do not necessarily occupy the point on the ideological spectrum that you might expect.
Think they should. Yeah. And I think that has to do with something about institutions that don't proactively probe their own internal shadows, or have a harder time seeing where their own internal biases and actions don't line up with their outward proclamations, are the ones that fundamentally tend to have these kinds of problems at a much deeper level. So, like, again, we're getting into the weeds, and we're talking now way too darkly in code. But
yeah,
we're
but
not, and we're
people
talking
are going to
about
get it though. If you know,
people are
going to
get it. They're going to get it. Travis Donraj, to my knowledge, is not about exploitation of the kind that we're discussing. He's talking more about sort of ideological exploitation, but I think fundamentally his complaint is rooted in this idea that these organizations that are talking about diversity are perfectly happy to put people of color up front, just so long as those people of color are espousing exactly the same views and ideologies and viewpoints.
A lot of different kinds of people all saying the same thing.
As the wealthy upper class manager who lives in the annex and doesn't get out much. And fundamentally, I don't think that that's just a CBC problem, but I think it's an endemic problem to the industry as a whole. And I do see it on the right, that there's a version of this that happens in right-wing media, for sure. And there's a version of this that absolutely happens in left-wing media. I think it's very endemic in left-wing media. And if your sense of your, cultural mission is to be social justice, bringing up the equalizing the forces of power and blah, 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 you are particularly vulnerable to some of these problems because you are going to have a much, much harder time being honest with yourself when your own institution isn't living up to its stated values.
The more he talked of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons. One last point, and then we'll shut up here. And it's building off what Jen was saying there. I actually don't have a problem with news organizations having an ideological agenda, and that's both sort of like they have the right to under the Constitution, but also just as business sense. If you want to market yourself to the center left, go for it. If you want to market yourself to the right, go for it. The far right, the far left, the center. Who cares? I don't care. CBC can't do it.
That's right.
You can't. The CBC and other similar organizations that have different mandates. The CBC cannot go, we're going to chase the ad revenue in that sweet urban center left niche by catering our stories and our guest choices to it.
No.
And the CBC, I don't envy them. You and I have talked about this a lot. You wrote a banger column about what the future of the CBC should look like. I get it. I know the situation they're in, and I know it's hard. But I have to look at the outcome here, not how hard it is to get the inputs right.
Yeah, the CBC cannot be an activist organization that fundamentally sees itself as turning or promoting basically left-wing activist journalism. That is not appropriate. That's not an appropriate mandate for an organization that's paid by taxpayer dollars, because you can't take money from a wide swathe of Canadians with a wide variety of positions and ideologies and then use that money to preach back at the ones who are wrong. That can't be your mandate. Now, if you want to go run an activist organization that's a left-wing, I'm going to do communist screeds the power from above. Man, you do you. I mean, shit. Hit me up. I'll give you whatever business advice I can give you. I will champion and applaud your success, and I will suggest a bunch of different models for you. And man, happy to help. But that can't be.
That's not the CBC.
That can't be the CBC. Not if the CBC wishes to continue to hold the trust and mandate of individuals. So
the CBC can choose to reform itself, or it will die. And I don't know when it will die, but it will happen eventually.
That's right. So anyway, I don't think we have anything else to say about the matter, but hope everybody enjoyed us talking in code for 7 minutes longer than we intended. Love that. I think our audience will love that for us.
Yeah, but like I said, if you know, you know.
If you know, you know, right?
A third of our audience is going to know exactly what we were talking about. The other 2/3,
I think maybe hopefully 2/3 of audience will be able to relate some of what we were saying to other institutional industry norms. So there you go. Anyway.
www.readtheline.ca. We will not speak in code when we publish our next dispatch. We might paywall it, though. So give us money and you will read our uncoded messages. Thanks for everyone for being tuned in. We'll talk with you soon. Check us out at our website. Like, subscribe, follow us on our social media apps, blah, blah, blah. And we will talk with you soon.